All right. Thank you for those of us who are here and joining us for our Stories from Abroad series. My name is Delaney, and I'm the Events and Outreach Supervisor for the UW Study Abroad offices on campus. My guest here today is Lydia Odegard. She is a current graduate student in the School of Education's Global Higher Ed Master's Degree Program. As a graduate student, she works at IAP as the Enrollment Management Assistant, helping support the logistical processes that make study abroad possible for UW-Madison students. During her undergrad at UW, she double majored in Languages and Cultures of Asia and Gender and Women's Studies with a certificate in South Asian Studies. Since studying abroad in India, she has kept up with her interest in South Asia by returning to India to study Hindi in an intensive language program, and has also taught Hindi as a TA for the UW summer language programs. If the audience for this interview could keep your mics muted, that would help to make sure that the video doesn't glitch as we navigate the technology system here. Additionally, if you have any questions you would like to ask, feel free to put them in the chat at any time, and I will relay that message to our guest. Let's get started.
Great.
So, Lydia, where are you calling from today? We always like to see where our virtual guests are joining us from.
So I am in Madison currently. I was born and raised here and have completed all my education here, so still right back here at home. Yep.
Proud Madison citizen, student, all of the above.
Yes.
Fantastic. One of my favorite questions to ask as well, to get us started on the study abroad questions, is why were you interested in studying abroad, or what kind of sparked that interest in the first place?
Yeah, so originally I decided to study abroad in India because I had some previous experience in India. So my mom, who's on this call, hello Jill Odegard, has been traveling to India kind of throughout my life. So originally I actually took a gap year in India after graduating from high school. And lived with one of the families that my mom has come to know over the years. So that was kind of my introduction to India. But then when I started my time at UW-Madison as an undergrad and realized that this was something that I could study more formally, I was really attracted to the UW in India program.
Wonderful. That's really great to hear, like that your interest started early. I know that's not always how it works for everyone, but it's really interesting to see how that path kind of grows and becomes a real study abroad program. Would you be able to briefly describe your program? So that could include like the duration or how long you were there, housing type, program structure, and especially, so for those of our friends who are joining us, whenever we have UW in the title or that variation, it's a signature program. So when we talk about UW in India, we're referencing a program that was designed for UW students in mind. So just want to give that caveat before we kind of dive into those program details. But go ahead. I want to describe.
Yeah, so UW in India is a signature program, as Delaney just gave you that background. So this is actually the longest running UW study abroad program and one of the first study abroad programs in general in India. So has a pretty long legacy. It started in like the early 60s. Right. And the program itself has kind of a combination of coursework. There's an independent study fieldwork portion of it. And then there's also the opportunity to engage in a cultural and arts tutorial of your choosing. So students will choose dance or visual arts, or I chose yoga for mine. Some students will choose to study another language on top of Hindi. So in addition to the coursework, I stayed with a host family, and students can choose to stay in either guest houses or apartments or with host families. So I stayed with a host family. And all of our courses were held at kind of a central program house. So instead of studying at a university, a local university, we were all studying together in the same classes at a program house that was specifically for students on our program.
Wonderful. Did you get to pick you talked about your fieldwork experience as well. Was that also by choice, or was it kind of designed for the program?
Yeah, so everyone gets to choose their fieldwork project, which is a really cool aspect of the program. It allows for a lot of really individualized, tailored experiences. So I was a double major in gender and women's studies, as well as languages and cultures of Asia. So I got to kind of focus on my intersection of interests between gender and women's studies and South Asian studies. So my fieldwork project was focused on kind of looking at how different communities of women in Varanasi supported each other and informed one another's identities. So I was interested in looking at like ritual spaces, as well as more informal spaces where women gathered, and just the impacts of those gatherings just on their experiences and their identities as women.
That's really cool. I love
Yeah,
that kind of combines together both areas of your study into study abroad. That's
for
not
sure.
always possible on campus to be able to combine so intrinsically. So that's really cool to be able to hear about that experience. Did you receive any scholarships to go to India on this program?
No, unfortunately, I did not. So I did apply for a scholarship. I didn't get it. So unfortunately, I can't speak to the experience of applying and successfully receiving a scholarship. But I wish everyone luck in that pursuit.
Very fair. I completely understand. While there are scholarships available, it's not always, it doesn't always line up. But we like to ask that question to hear a
Exactly.
little bit about the background of funding and things like that.
Yeah.
Could you speak a little bit more about your homestay or like living with a local family and how that experience tied into your overall study abroad kind of journey?
Yeah, so I lived with a really wonderful host family. My family consisted of kind of a host father figure and his wife, and many families in India live in extended family structures. So the host family that I stayed with was an extended family. And so there was also kind of my host grandma. And then I had like a host sister, and so it was quite an extended family, and they were all really really wonderful. My host father was actually pretty tightly involved in the program. He is kind of in the tourism business and gives a lot of tours of Varanasi to tourists, but he also works with the program with the classes that are embedded into our program. So he'll give us, or he did give us periodic tours of Varanasi and kind of helped us understand like the history of the city, as well as how you can see that history playing out in people's day-to-day lives and the structures within the city. So it was really awesome to have him as a host father because he was just so knowledgeable and helpful throughout my experience. He's also a Hindi instructor himself, so he was really great in helping correct my Hindi. So he was one of, I guess, two host family members who actually spoke English. So that was another really great experience for me, is being forced to speak in Hindi with the other host family members, which really helped my language skills throughout the process. I also lived with another UW student. So my host family had a few different rooms in their house. So there was one other UW student there with me, which was also just helpful to, you know, have another American living alongside of me, and being able to share that experience with him.
Wonderful. That's so cool. How did you choose to study on the UW India program? Were there other programs in India that you were interested in looking at, or was this kind of the pillar? Talking a little bit more about choosing that program specifically.
Yeah, I think the main draw was just kind of how well established it was. And I originally learned about it through my Hindi class my freshman year. So I started taking Hindi at UW my freshman year, and one of the undergrads who worked in the study abroad office came to speak with our class. Delaney is very familiar with
Love it.
these staff members, and she supervises them. So yeah, an undergrad from the study abroad office came for a class visit in my Hindi class, and just kind of talked about the program, and she had been on the program and had a lot of really great things to say about it. So kind of that in combination with a few of my friends in my Hindi class were planning to participate in the program the following year. So kind of those factors all drew me to that specific program. And then just on top of that, knowing, how well established it was, and just how much it allowed for really individualized experiences.
Yeah. That makes me so happy. I also picked my program based on a classroom presentation.
See, it works.
That gives me so much joy, since we do a lot of those throughout the year. So if we have any prospective students, you may be seeing a classroom presentation more than once as well. Sometimes we get a few repeaters. I'm going to be throwing some resources for helping pick your program into our chat for anyone who is looking. I also have the UW in India hyperlink there as well in the kind of second chunk of text that I inserted. But if anyone is interested in learning about some questions that you should ask, similar to these, about what styles of programs you're looking for and everything like that. I kind of want to jump into questions about while you were abroad next. What was the most challenging for you to adjust to during your study abroad program, and how did you deal with this?
Yeah, so I think I was in a little bit of a unique position just having been to India before, which gave me a huge advantage in kind of the cultural adjustment piece. I was very familiar with just kind of a broad overview of Indian cultures and customs and faux pas and kind of that stuff that's useful to know when you're going abroad. But I think honestly, the most challenging part was kind of getting off my high horse a little bit about that, and just having some humility and recognizing that I didn't know everything about India, and studying in Varanasi was a really different experience than the experiences I'd had before in India. I was living in a much different environment. I was in a village before in northern India in the mountains, and so I'd never lived in an Indian city before, and even though I was familiar with kind of that broad, intro to Indian cultures, there was a lot that I realized that I didn't know. So just having that experience and like being humbled and realizing that there was still a lot for me to learn, and there still is a lot for me to learn, was probably one of the most challenging parts. I think on top of that, I had studied Hindi in the past. I had started during my gap year after high school, so I kind of did some self-study, and then I continued when I started at UW. So I had that Hindi foundation, but when I arrived in Varanasi, I realized that the way that Hindi was used was very different than the ways that I had heard it used in other places. So that was another adjustment process of kind of rewiring how I used Hindi and becoming more familiar with the more formal register that was used in Varanasi.
Okay, so was it kind of like a dialect difference, or kind of that formal nature versus informal for the language?
It was, I would say both. Yeah, for example, one kind of interesting feature of the language, if you're a language nerd like me, is that
you can tell I'm also a language major. So I understand and empathize, and that's where my interest comes in from my language.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to share it. So in Varanasi, instead of using the pronoun I, they use the pronoun we to refer to I. So I've heard kind of different explanations of this. One of the explanations I've heard is that it's kind of a way of expressing humility. So I'm not sure exactly, don't quote me on that, but that's what I've heard about it. So that was really hard to like retrain my brain to do. And obviously like people understood me if I was using I instead of we, but just to kind of try to adjust to those more local customs to try to give myself some more credibility in the context of the local culture was something that I was really interested in. So yeah, it was just little things like that were hard to kind of switch my brain to make those grammatical adjustments and stuff.
I can definitely empathize with that, and that kind of those nuances of the differences in the language of the classroom, also just with the local kind of dialect and conversational piece. So thank you for filling my language major heart with those
Yes.
those experiences. You've had all of those experiences of your gap year and things like that. Did those experiences kind of craft some expectations for your study abroad program? And how did your experience in Varanasi kind of contrast with those expectations, or just with general perceptions that you may have had coming from the US?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, this goes back partially to what I had mentioned before of just feeling like I knew a lot about India and going in and realizing that wasn't true, or that I knew a lot about maybe one very tiny slice of India. So I think just being open to the differences in the local cultures and traditions that existed in Varanasi. One thing that was kind of really striking for me in the context of Varanasi was that I saw kind of the caste system operate in a really different way than I had seen it before. So that was a really interesting experience for me that I hadn't quite experienced before in my other times in India. So that would be, I guess, one thing that stuck out to me. I think, though, in general, one thing that I had to battle, or not battle, but just kind of counter when I was having conversations with people while going abroad is the year before I went abroad, there was a really brutal rape case that received a lot of attention in the international media. That was a really horrifying case, and unfortunately, because of that, India received this kind of reputation as being the rape capital of the world, so to speak. So that was kind of a hard thing to see as far as India's reputation. And obviously, like, there's unfortunately a lot of sexual assault and gender-based violence that occurs in India. But just having to kind of have those conversations with people who were asking me if I was concerned about sexual assault and those things, and just kind of having to engage in a more complex conversation with people about, yes, that is a problem, but there's also, it's not the full picture of India, and there's a lot of other parts to India. And so just kind of having to convey my experiences in a way that didn't feed into those stereotypes, while recognizing that gender-based violence is very much a problem in India, as it is in the whole world. So
Right. Yeah. It's interesting to hear about student experiences and like the perceptions that others have on their study abroad experience. I know that I can echo those kind of like added layers, and so it's always really interesting to see how those layers are deconstructed when you get there, and your experiences and how those can be very contrasting from what you had kind of surround you before going. So thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate it.
yeah.
So you had mentioned that you lived with another UW student, and so did you have mostly experience with other UW students, especially because this was a signature program and it was designed for UW students, or did you have the chance to befriend locals and kind of integrate in that way?
Yeah, so I would say this was a challenging part of my experience in that, as you mentioned, my classes were all taken with other UW students, and I was spending a lot of my time with them. And if I had been, a student on a local campus, it might have been easier to kind of get to know other people around my age, people who were, studying at the university level. But I would say that most of my connections with people in the local community were kind of through either my host family or through the program itself. So we had a lot of really great program staff members who were very supportive and very welcoming to us. For example, in my fieldwork research, I did a lot of interviews with women in the local community, and many of the women that I was able to interview I was connected with through program staff members. So they were really generous in helping me make those connections, and sometimes bringing me to their houses and being able to assist me with that. So yeah, I would say the program staff members overall were just very welcoming and generous in connecting us to people within the local community. So I would say that's where most of my connections stemmed from. But I still wish that I had the opportunity to perhaps connect with more people within my peer group, which I think, there were ways to do that, but I perhaps didn't seek them out as much as I could have.
I understand that as well. Yeah, I think it's balance, definitely, especially because it's this new experience in this new city. And I myself, going on a signature program as well, I definitely leaned on those who were coming from UW just to be able to have those semblances of home. But, we always have those coulda, woulda, shoulda type of situations. But it's really cool to see how you were able to integrate into the community through a various number of people and mediums type of thing. So thank you.
Definitely.
I want to pause for any of our audience members to ask any questions, get a drink of water. I see we have the same water cup. So, so I can ask our audience if we have any specific majors represented today, or if you have any questions for Lydia off the bat. We want to make sure that if there are any questions that you have, we don't want to save them until the end. So feel free to put them into the chat if you want to turn on your microphone, any of those ways that we get to use Zoom, we're more than happy to.
Awesome. So hello, namaste, Lydia. So I just had a two-part question. I guess my first question is sort of more, I'm a fellowship advisor. I work at Texas A&M and I studied abroad in India at a different time, but so it's two parts. Basically, my first question is, when it comes to sort of some of the different concerns that you all kind of touched on early in terms of some of the gender-based violence, and then in the wake of a lot of the different sort of things we see going on in terms of minority sort of religions in India and caste, what are some points of advice that you give to a student who would be interested in studying abroad in India or South Asia? So that's just in terms of those concerns. And I guess my second part is, for the students who are interested in studying abroad and who may be interested in getting involved in this kind of work in the future, what sort of insights would you offer to them in terms of how your study abroad experience informed your own career path?
Yeah, thank you, Ben. It's good to see you. Yeah, as far as kind of advice that I would give to students to kind of prepare them for those nuances of religion and minoritized religions in India and gender, I would say, there's a certain amount of research you can do in advance, and I think it's really helpful to have that context and to understand kind of what you're getting into, so to speak, or what that may look like on the ground. But honestly, having had some experience in India in the past, and then going to Varanasi and just realizing that there was just so many nuances that I didn't understand, I think my main piece of advice would just be to, really remain open and curious and be ready to have your assumptions be challenged when you are kind of there in the moment and experiencing it, and really take advantage of any kind of conversations you find yourself in where people may be willing to kind of elaborate more on, their experiences as people in the local community with these topics, and to kind of understand those when people are willing to share will, I think, give people really valuable insight that you can't gain from doing research in advance.
Definitely.
Yeah, I want to interject as well for any of our prospective students. Thank you for the questions, and I love that you turned on your video. That's very exciting. It's our first video question that we've had. For any of our prospective students from UW, we do have our pre-departure orientation programs for each program or region or even country specific. So we do have those additional resources as well. And I'm going to just randomly be throwing hyperlinks in as well with our health and safety we take very seriously as well. And these conversations do come up as it does here on campus. And so including this health and safety hyperlink is not to scare anyone or anything like that, but also that pre-departure research that you can do individually on top of those that we offer through our program office. It can be really useful. And I know that I definitely, reflecting back, I know that there were a lot more resources that I personally didn't utilize. So hearing you highlight that personal research is really, really important as well. And then highlighting our 24-hour emergency phone as well. I love to highlight that too specifically. So if you have any questions or anything like that, not only from your program staff that are often there with you, but highlighting the safety support that you can receive from our office at any time, anywhere is another great piece. Thank you for those questions. Oh, getting me so excited about all of these.
Ben, I realized I didn't answer your second question, but I believe that's one of Delaney's questions coming up. So.
Oh, okay. No, for sure. I was just kind of like, all right, I guess that's fine. No, I'm just kidding. But
Yeah.
it's all
Feel free to start that conversation as well. If you want to hop on that one, we're having a conversation. Let's flow how it goes.
Okay, so Ben, I believe your question was essentially how this has kind of impacted me personally, professionally, etc. Yeah, so this program undoubtedly impacted me on kind of multiple planes. So I guess in terms of my academic path, I continued to study South Asia throughout my undergrad, and I think my fieldwork project really kind of steered me in a direction within my gender and women's studies major of focusing my individual projects and papers on the intersection of gender in South Asia. So that was a really cool experience to have, just to kind of steer me in that direction of realizing that even as an undergrad I could kind of focus my work a little bit more than I maybe was before. So that was one way. And then I think also, after I graduated from my undergrad, I went back to India, to a different city, Jaipur, and I participated in a semester there of an intensive language program. So it was through the American Institute of Indian Studies. And this organization has several branches all around India and offers different Indian languages at their different sites. So I continued to study Hindi at the American Institute of Indian Studies. I did that for a semester. So I think, just really wanting to, go back and continue that more immersive Hindi study was definitely inspired by my time in Varanasi. And then I guess the most clear way that it's impacting me professionally is my current master's degree program. So I am in a master's degree program with Delaney currently. It's called called the Global Higher Education Master's Degree Program, and it's through the School of Education at UW-Madison. So our coursework is kind of focused on how we can grow into international educators in the sphere of higher education. So whether that's working with international students or students who are studying abroad, or recruiting international students. So just kind of all of the things that involve the internationalization of higher education. And so obviously that has very directly been impacted by my time studying abroad, and just realizing I could, be one of those professionals who help support either international students or students hoping to go abroad or having returned from abroad or in the process. So that's a really obvious way it's impacted me professionally.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And I guess this is like not a real question, but when you're kind of talking about the AIIS and Hindi, it made me think about a site I came across recently. I don't know if y'all have seen Frank Pritchett's sort of big compilation of like all these South Asia resources. It's got like tons of free learning stuff for Hindi and Urdu and maps. So if it's okay, I could just put that in the chat really quickly.
Please do.
That's
Thank
awesome.
you.
Yeah, I haven't heard of that actually, so that would be helpful.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'll also be throwing something in the chat. I love to highlight our major advising pages. So you talked a lot about how your academics played into both of your majors and things like that. So we offer major advising pages on our website that is kind of a one-stop shop for programs that your departments can recommend, as well as questions that you should be asking about the credits that you could receive that apply directly to your majors and things like that. So I highly, highly recommend, because there's a wide variety of program major advising pages and things like that to be able to connect with and kind of give you a really good kind of worksheet of how to work through picking the program. So, and thank you for the resources. Oh, I love it. It looks like we have a question in the chat as well. So Lydia, are there any experiences that stick out in your mind and would recommend that I do if I study in Varanasi?
Yeah, so I mean, this was very much embedded in the program structure and the curriculum, but one of the really neat aspects of the program was that in my history class, a lot of our classes involved actually going to different sites in Varanasi and around Varanasi to kind of really see how history was playing out on the ground. So, and we also took 2 kind of more extended field trips throughout the semester that were largely connected to our history class. So I think, yeah, just in general, there are so many Varanasi is considered to be a very religious city, so that involves Hinduism as well as Jainism, Buddhism, and Islam as well. So there's just so many religions and religious sites connected to Varanasi that it's a really amazing place to kind of learn more about those traditions. So yeah, just all of the temples connected with those religions. And also one of my favorite things to do in Varanasi was, so Varanasi is located on the Ganges River, which is a river that is considered sacred in Hinduism. And there's a lot of activity that goes on along the banks of this river in Varanasi. It's a very kind of social place. So my classmates and I would end up most days after class going to the banks of the river and just kind of hanging out there, hanging out with the guy who was selling tea on the banks of the river and some of the other characters who would hang out there. So that was a way that I really enjoyed. Again, like getting connected to the community is just spending time in these public places where there was a lot going on socially. So even though it seems just like kind of a simple thing, it ended up being a really formative kind of routine in my time there.
That's so special. Thank you for sharing that. That's such an intimate way to connect with the city as well. I want to be cognizant of our time, and I also don't want to be cut off in the middle of a question because we love that 40-minute Zoom cut off. If there are any other questions that we have from our audience, I want to make sure that we highlight those. Otherwise, I have one of my favorite questions to ask because I've asked myself that about my abroad experience as well. So I would end with that one if we don't have any other questions. If you do, please feel free to turn on your mic or send them in the chat. I'll take a sip of water to let people wait. Otherwise, I'll be asking my favorite question. Not that those other questions aren't important too. All right, it looks like if I'm reading the room correctly, I want to ask if you studied abroad again, and as you are a multiple returner to India, but if you studied abroad again, what would you have done differently? And what would you do differently if you could kind of rewrite it?
Yeah, so I think the first thing I would do differently is to find more ways to connect with people in my peer group. So as I mentioned, it was a little bit difficult sometimes to do that because I was studying in a program that wasn't hosted at the local university. So I think if I were to do it again, I would have tried to make connections with maybe student groups at the local university, or tried to find kind of ins to that community so that I could meet more people in my peer group, because I had a lot of great relationships with my host family and program staff and people I met through the program staff, but not necessarily people my age. So I was really interested in trying to connect more with people in my peer group, understand maybe what their lives are like at the local university and how those experiences are really different. So yeah, I think that's the first thing I would have done differently. I think in addition, I probably would have started my fieldwork project earlier, honestly, which, procrastination happens, but I did spend a good chunk of time on my fieldwork, but I think if I had started it earlier, I could have established even more and better connections with the individuals who I interviewed and the people I did focus groups with. So.
Thank you. Yes, it's always really interesting as well to hear what would you do differently, and from the different people that we have interviewed and that we get to interview in the future. So thank you for answering that as well, because that can be kind of a hard question to reflect on too. So if we don't have any other questions for Lydia right at this moment, I will toss in, if you have any more questions and want to reach out to our office, here is our connections. Yes, thank you. Thank you to our audience for connecting with us as well. If you want to send any more questions to Lydia, I will be able to and be happy to pass them along. And I'm also going to plug our social media accounts, because this interview will also be uploaded there for all to see. I see the claps and the applause. Thank you so much to our audience. We really appreciate the involvement as well as the questions that you asked. Thank you to Lydia. And if you want to tune in next week as well, we'll be talking with Madison about Singapore and Malaysia, and hopefully be continuing our Stories from Abroad series in the future. So thank you all. Thank
you, Delaney, for the wonderful conversation.
Yes, I would be happy to talk about this for hours and hours, but of course we get cut off. But have a great rest of your day, everyone. Stay well, stay safe.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Yes.
Good to see you all.